The Mississippi sun, thick and golden, clung to Clara's skin as she stepped out of the old Ford, squinting up at the grand gates of Graceland. It was July, and the air was a heavy, humid blanket, but a thrill, sharp and electric, cut through the heat. Clara clutched her worn canvas bag, her heart thrumming a rhythm somewhere between a drum solo and a nervous flutter. She was here, at Graceland, not as a fan on a pilgrimage, but as a temporary assistant to one of Elvis Presley's lesser-known managers, Mr. Davies. An opportunity to be a fly on the wall, to observe, to write, to breathe the same air as the king felt impossible, a dream plucked straight from her most audacious fantasies. Her instructions had been clear: be discreet, be helpful, and under no circumstances bother Mr. Presley. "He's a busy man, Miss Jensen," Mr. Davies had boomed over the phone, his voice like gravel. "He needs his space. You're here to help me, not to pester him." Clara understood. She was a ghost, a silent observer, in the grand, opulent house, here to learn the ropes of the music industry, perhaps even gather material for the stories that perpetually simmered in her mind. A stern-faced guard, his uniform crisp, despite the heat, nodded her through the gates. The famous white columns of the mansion seemed to gleam almost unreal. Inside the house was a whirlwind of activity, a constant hum of staff managers, distant relatives, and hangers-on. Fonts rang incessantly, muffled voices echoed from various rooms, and the scent of southern cooking mingled with something expensive and floral. Clara, small and quiet, felt like a tiny fish dropped into a grand, glittering aquarium. Her first days were a blur of errands and observations. She sorted fan mail, delivered messages, fetched coffees, and learned the intricate dance of a household built around a superstar. She saw Elvis, sometimes fleeting glimpses, a flash of a sequined suit as he hurried past, a deep laugh rumbling from behind a closed door, the faint strum of a guitar late at night from the music room, each time a tremor ran through her. He was larger than life, even in casual clothes, even in silence. The aura was undeniable, a magnetic force that pulled at every person in the house. Most of the time he was a whirlwind of energy, a force of nature. He'd burst into a room, crack a joke, flash that dazzling smile, and everyone would light up. He was generous too. Clara saw him hand out cash to staff members who needed it, noticed the genuine concern in his eyes when someone was troubled. He had a natural kindness that went beyond his fame, a warmth that seemed to radiate from his very core. He loved his family fiercely, his Memphis Mafia companions like brothers. He'd play practical jokes, then immediately make sure no one was genuinely hurt or upset. But there were other moments too. Moments Clara, with her writer's eye, couldn't help but notice. Times when the laughter faded, when the dazzling smile softened into something thoughtful, almost melancholic. She'd see him standing alone by a window, staring out at the expanse of grounds, his posture subtly slumped, a faraway look in his eyes. He'd be surrounded by people, yet seem utterly, profoundly alone. It was these moments that intrigued her, that hinted at a depth beneath the polished surface, a man behind the legend. One afternoon, Mr. Davies sent her to the music room to fetch a specific sheet music. The door was ajar, and as she approached, she heard the low, mournful sound of a gospel hymn. It wasn't Elvis's powerful stage voice, but a softer, more intimate tone filled with a raw, yearning quality. She paused, respectful, hesitant to interrupt. Through the crack in the door, she saw him seated at a piano, his back to her, his head bowed slightly. He wasn't wearing anything fancy, just a simple shirt and slacks, his hair a little disheveled. He sang a verse, then repeated it as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. The melody was haunting, the lyrics about seeking solace, about finding peace in a troubled world. She felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't the Elvis of the movies or the concert stage. This was a man alone with his thoughts and his music, expressing something profound that perhaps only he understood. It was a glimpse into a vulnerability she hadn't expected, a quiet moment of introspection from the man who typically commanded the world's attention. She cleared her throat softly, just enough to announce her presence. Elvis stopped playing but didn't turn immediately. There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched thick with unspoken thoughts. Then, slowly, he turned his head. His blue eyes, usually so bright and full of life, seemed a little tired, a little shadowed. He didn't smile. His famous smile just looked at her, truly looked at her with an unreadable expression. Clara felt suddenly self-conscious, like she'd stumbled upon a secret. "Mr. Davies sent me for the sheet music for Amazing Grace," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He blinked, a slow, deliberate movement as if coming back from a great distance. He nodded towards the piano. "It's right here," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Not the booming baritone she expected, but a softer, more reflective tone. "Been wrestling with it all morning." Clara stepped in, retrieved the sheet music, her fingers brushing against the worn paper. She held it, feeling the weight of the song's history, the weight of the moment. She looked at him again. He was still watching her, his gaze intense. Assessing. It wasn't a stare of judgment or curiosity, but something else, entirely a quiet search. You sing beautifully, Mr. Presley," she mumbled before she could stop herself, instantly regretting breaking her "don't bother him" rule. Her cheeks flushed. A faint smile, a real one this time, not a public grin, touched his lips. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it reached his eyes. "Thank you, honey," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Just trying to find the meaning." He paused, then added almost to himself, "Sometimes it feels like the meaning just keeps slipping away." Clara didn't know how to respond. She just nodded, her eyes wide, and left the room. The sheet music clutched in her hand, the sound of his quiet, searching words echoing in her ears. She had seen the king. Yes, but she had also seen a man searching for meaning, and in that moment the grand, glittering Graceland felt less like a monument to fame and more like a quiet, private world, full of untold stories. This was just the beginning. Days blurred into weeks. Clara settled into the rhythms of Graceland, becoming more comfortable, navigating its bustling halls and its quiet corners. Her initial awe hadn't faded, but it had morphed into something deeper, a fascination with the human element behind the legend. She observed Elvis from a distance, mostly. He was constantly in motion. A whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, impromptu, jam sessions in the music room, and the endless stream of people who sought his attention. She saw his boundless energy, the way he could light up a room with a single laugh, his generosity that knew no bounds. He'd surprise staff with thoughtful gifts, pull a struggling musician aside to offer advice, or spend hours signing autographs for fans. Waiting patiently at the gates, his kindness was genuine, a core part of who he was. He seemed to genuinely care about the people around him, even those he barely knew. Yet, despite the constant movement and the throngs of people, Clara kept noticing those fleeting moments of quiet withdrawal. They were quick, almost imperceptible, like shadows flitting across a bright wall. A sudden stillness in his eyes, a brief pause in conversation where his gaze would drift, unfocused, as if peering into an unseen distance. These weren't moments of sadness, exactly, but rather of a profound contemplation. A man wrestling with something internal, something he kept hidden beneath the surface of his vibrant persona. One afternoon she was tasked with tidying the small, rarely used library off the main living room. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that slanted through the heavy drapes. As she carefully arranged a stack of books, she noticed a worn copy of Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, tucked beneath a pile of film scripts. Pages were dog-eared, its spine cracked, clearly well read. It was a book about love, loss-giving, and the human condition. It seemed fitting somehow for a man who poured so much of himself into his art. Just then the library door creaked open and Elvis stepped in. Clara froze, a book in her hand. He rarely came into this particular room. He was dressed casually, a loose shirt, his hair falling boyishly across his forehead. He looked tired, his shoulders a little slumped. He didn't seem to notice her at first. He walked over to a grand leather armchair by the window and sank into it, letting out a long, weary sigh. Closed his eyes, his famous profile softened by the afternoon light. Clara held her breath, unsure if she should make herself known or simply continue her work quietly. She opted for the latter, moving slowly, carefully, her presence as unobtrusive as possible. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes. They landed on her, and for a moment he looked genuinely surprised, as if he'd forgotten anyone else was in the house. "Oh, hey there, honey," he said, his voice low and raspy, like he'd just woken up. "Didn't see you." "Just tidying up, Mr. Presley," Clara replied, her voice soft. He nodded, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Busy day," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He gestured vaguely at the stacks of scripts. "More movies, always more movies." There was a weariness in his tone that went beyond simple fatigue. It sounded like resignation. Clara risked a small comment. "They must be exhausting, making all those films." He looked at her, and for the first time she felt his full, unguarded attention. "Exhausting don't even begin to cover it. Honey, it's like putting on a costume and pretending to be someone else. Day in, day out, and folks love it, sure, but sometimes you wonder if you're ever gonna get to be you again." He sighed again, leaning his head back against the chair. "It's a strange thing, ain't it, to be everywhere and nowhere all at the same time?" Clara thought of the prophet and its themes of identity and purpose. "It sounds like a lot of pressure," she offered, choosing her words carefully. He chuckled, a short, humorless sound. "Pressure's just part of the gig, always has been. From the moment I stepped on that stage, it was like a train that never stops. Folks want more, always more, and I love 'em, I truly do. But sometimes you just want to get off the train, you know?" His gaze drifted to the window again, looking out at the sun-drenched lawn, just for a minute to see what it's like to stand still. Clara felt a pang of empathy. She imagined the sheer weight of being Elvis Presley, of carrying the expectations of millions. "I understand," she said, though she knew she couldn't. "Truly. It must be hard to find time for yourself." He turned his head slowly back to her. His eyes, usually so vibrant, held a wistful melancholy. "Time for myself is one thing. Time to just be, that's another. It's like my whole life's become a performance. Even when I'm just sitting here, I feel like I'm still on stage, still gotta be Elvis." He ran a hand through his hair. "I miss just being a man from Tupelo, Mississippi. Sometimes a boy who loved to sing gospel in church, who just wanted to play his guitar." He paused, a long silence stretching between them. "I miss knowing who that boy was, without all the noise." Clara thought of the quiet gospel song she had heard him sing. She gestured subtly towards the pile of books. "I saw your copy of The Prophet here," she said, trying to shift the conversation to something less heavy, but still connected to his inner world. "It's a beautiful book." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then a slight softening. "You read Gibran?" Clara nodded. "My mother gave me a copy. It helped me through some tough times." He reached over and picked up his copy, turning it over in his hands. "Yeah," he murmured, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. He understood a lot about folks, about life, about trying to find your way. He looked at the book, then at her. "There's a line in there. You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give. That one always gets me." He closed the book. "Sometimes, Clara, I feel like I've given so much of myself there ain't nothing left to give." He said her name easily, naturally, and it warmed her. It was the first time he'd acknowledged her as more than just a passing face. The moment hung in the air, a quiet understanding passing between them. He didn't ask her to solve anything. He just shared a piece of his weariness, a raw, unvarnished thought about the cost of his extraordinary life. She just listened, and that, she realized, was perhaps exactly what he needed. The library encounter marked a subtle shift in their interactions. Elvis still remained largely aloof, consumed by his schedule and the constant demands on his time and presence. But now, when their paths crossed, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a slight nod, a softer "Hey, Clara," then the general "Hey, honey." He used for most staff, but to Clara it felt significant. It was as if a tiny crack had appeared in the fortress of his fame. Allowing her a glimpse inside, she continued her work, observing him not with a fan's adoration, but with an artist's curiosity. She noticed how he sought out the quiet moments. He'd often retreat to the music room late at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, or when the house was at its busiest. She'd sometimes hear the soft strains of a piano, a soulful guitar riff, or the low rumble of his voice, singing gospel. It wasn't the powerful stage-ready voice, but something more intimate, raw, and searching. These were the moments he truly seemed to be himself, shedding the mantle of Elvis Presley, and simply being a man with a voice and a guitar. One evening, a violent summer storm rolled in, rattling the windows and plunging Graceland into a temporary blackout. Panic rippled through the house as staff fumbled for flashlights and candles. Clara, ever practical, had a small battery-powered lantern in her bag. She used it to help navigate the dark halls, ensuring everyone was safe. She found Elvis in the TV room, a large, usually bustling space, now eerily quiet in the dim emergency lighting. He was sitting on the grand sofa, a thoughtful expression on his face, illuminated by the flickering glow of a single candle. His guards were nearby, but he seemed lost in his own world. "Everything all right, Mr. Presley?" she asked softly, her lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. He looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes, then a slight smile. "Hey, Clara, yeah, just fine. Kinda peaceful, ain't it? All this quiet." He gestured around the room. "No phones ringing, no television blaring, just us." Clara nodded. "It is peaceful. A rare thing, I imagine." He chuckled softly. "You got that right, honey. Rarest thing in the world these days." He patted the cushion next to him. "Come on, sit a spell. No sense standing in the dark." Clara hesitated, then accepted, settling onto the plush sofa, a respectful distance from him. The only sounds were the drumming rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. It was a strange, almost neural moment, sitting in the dark with Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, in the quiet intimacy of a power outage. "You're a quiet one, ain't you?" he said, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question, more of an observation. "Not many quiet folks around here. They always want something. Or want to tell you something." He paused. "You just listen. I try to," Clara replied. "I think people often just need to be heard." He nodded slowly. "You're right about that. Funny thing is, the more people hear my voice, the less they seem to hear me." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture of weariness. "It's like they love the sound, the songs, the moves, but they don't really know the man making them." Clara thought of her own quiet dreams, her desire to write stories that captured the nuances of human experience. "Perhaps," she ventured, "it's hard for people to separate the legend from the person, especially when the legend is so big." "Big don't even describe it, Clara," he said, a rueful smile playing on his lips. "It's like a whole other creature, and sometimes I feel like it's swallowed me whole. Left me standing on the outside looking in." His voice was low, almost a whisper, laden with a vulnerability that surprised her. "You ever feel like that? Like you're not entirely sure where you end and the world begins?" Clara considered the question. "Not on your scale, of course," she said, "but yes, sometimes when you're trying to figure out who you're supposed to be or what people expect of you, it's easy to lose sight of who you truly are inside, especially when there's so much noise telling you who you should be." He looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the candlelight, deep and thoughtful. "Noise," he repeated. "Yeah, that's a good word for it. A whole lot of noise, and sometimes it's so loud you can't hear your own heart beating." He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. "I just wonder, when all the noise stops and the lights go out, what's left? What's real?" The question hung in the air, profound and heavy, a direct echo of her earlier thought about his search for meaning. Clara didn't have an answer. She simply sat there, sharing the silence, the darkness, and the quiet weight of his contemplation. In that moment, the power outage became less about inconvenience and more about an unexpected window into the soul of a man. The storm raged outside, but inside, in the dim light of a single candle, a quiet connection was forming, born not of fame or adoration, but of shared humanity. She understood then that his need wasn't for more applause, but for someone to simply see him beyond the chaos. The storm passed, the lights came back on, and the usual frenetic pace of Graceland resumed. But the brief, intimate conversation in the dark had deepened the unspoken bond between Elvis and Clara. He began to seek her out in small, subtle ways, not for tasks, but for a moment of quiet interaction. He'd pause by her desk and ask about her day or comment on a book she was reading. He'd even start leaving her small notes, sometimes a quick, "Thanks for the tea," or "That's a good song," scrawled on a napkin, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. Clara, in turn, found herself even more attuned to his moods. She saw the moments when the weariness in his eyes was particularly pronounced, when his usual vibrant energy seemed to falter. Constant demands, the relentless schedule of recordings, film shoots, and upcoming tours seemed to be taking a toll. He was still professional, still charming, still the king. But beneath it all, she sensed a growing exhaustion, a profound sense of spiritual fatigue. One afternoon, a particularly grueling recording session ran late. Clara was tidying the studio space, packing up cables and microphones long after everyone else had left. The control room lights were off, and the main studio floor was dim, bathed in the soft glow of a few indicator lights on the mixing board. She heard a sigh from the vocal booth and realized Elvis was still there. He hadn't left with his musicians or his manager. She approached the booth cautiously, seeing him through the glass. He was slumped on a stool, his head in his hands, his guitar lying discarded beside him. He looked utterly spent. His usual perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, and the sparkle was gone from his eyes. He wasn't singing, wasn't moving, just sitting motionless in the quiet, sterile space. Clara hesitated, then gently tapped on the glass. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes red, rimmed. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw a raw vulnerability, a plea for understanding in his gaze. "You all right, Mr. Presley?" she asked, her voice soft through the intercom. He offered a weak, tired smile. "Just a little wrung out, honey, like I been squeezed dry." Pushed himself up and unlatched the booth door, stepping out into the dim studio. The air in the booth, she noticed, was heavy with the scent of sweat and something else, a deep, almost tangible weariness. "It was a long session," Clara offered. "Yeah, long. And the songs. Sometimes they just don't feel like me anymore. Like I'm singing words someone else wrote to a tune, someone else picked, for a crowd I'll never really know." He walked over to a worn leather couch and sat down heavily, leaning his head back against the cushions. "It's a strange business, Clara. You give your heart and soul, and sometimes it feels like you're just making noise for money." Clara watched him, her heart aching for the man behind the myth. "But you love to sing," she said. "I've heard you late at night when you sing gospel. It's different. It's beautiful. It comes from a different place." He opened his eyes, looking at her, a flicker of surprise, then a deep sadness. "You heard that, huh?" he murmured. "And I don't know how much longer I can keep being both." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. He wasn't just tired from a long day. He was tired of the performance, tired of the demands, tired of feeling disconnected from his true self. He seemed adrift in the vast ocean of his own fame. He looked at her, a long, assessing gaze. He wasn't seeing his assistant, but a person. "Just listen, honey, that's enough." He paused, then added, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into a void and nobody hears me. Not the real me, anyway." Clara's heart went out to him. She knew that feeling of being misunderstood, of having something vital to say, but no one truly listening. She settled herself onto a nearby stool, not speaking. Just being present, she offered him a silent, empathetic presence, a non-judgmental witness to his weariness. The hours passed in quiet. Elvis eventually dozed off, his breathing deep and even. The first truly peaceful sleep she had seen him have. Clara just sat, watching the city lights flicker outside the studio window, listening to the gentle hum of the unused equipment. She realized then that the true weight of his life wasn't the schedule or the public scrutiny, but the profound isolation that came with being an icon. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone in the deepest corners of his heart. And in that quiet, vulnerable moment, a plan began to form in Clara's mind. She wanted to create a space just for a little while where the king could simply be a man, and perhaps finally articulate the question that seemed to haunt his every waking moment. The idea formed slowly in Clara's mind, a fragile seed of an idea that grew with each observation of Elvis's quiet despair. He needed a sanctuary, a moment of profound quiet away from the clamor. Graceland, for all its comforts, was still a public stage, constantly buzzing with activity. The recording studio was a workspace full of pressure. He needed a different kind of space. She began to subtly prepare the small, seldom-used sunroom at the back of Graceland. It was tucked away, forgotten by most of the household's regular traffic. She dusted, polished, rearranged the comfortable wicker furniture, and brought in a few potted plants. She found a stack of his favorite spiritual books and some of his lesser-known gospel records, placing them casually on a small side table. She even brewed a thermos of his favorite herbal tea, leaving it near the window with a clean mug. It was an offering, a silent invitation to peace, not a direct plea. One late evening, after a particularly trying day of photo shoots and fan meetings, Clara saw Elvis retreat to his private quarters, looking utterly drained. The house was finally beginning to quiet down, the last of the Memphis Mafia heading out for the night, the kitchen staff tidying up. She decided this was the moment. She left a small handwritten note on his bedside table. Tea in the sunroom. Quiet space if you need it. No pressure, no demands, just an option. She waited in her own small room, her heart thumping a quiet tattoo against her ribs. Would he even see the note? Would he ignore it? Or would he for once allow himself to seek the solace she offered? An hour passed, then two. Just as she was about to give up and head to bed, she heard soft footsteps in the hall. They weren't the usual confident stride, but a slow, almost hesitant shuffle. A sliver of light appeared under her door, then moved past. She heard a soft creak as the sunroom door opened, then close again, a deep, quiet sigh. Clara breathed a silent sigh of relief. He had gone. She gave him time, half an hour, then quietly made her way towards the sunroom. As she approached, she heard the faint, almost imperceptible strains of a gospel hymn, not sung, but hummed, a low, comforting vibration. It was the same hymn she'd heard him playing on the piano. That first day she peered through the glass panels of the door. He was there, seated in one of the wicker armchairs facing the dark garden. The only light in the room came from a single small table lamp casting a warm, soft glow around him. He was holding a book, but not reading it. Just tracing his thumb over the cover, the thermos of tea sat on the table beside him, untouched. He wasn't restless, wasn't pacing. He was simply being. Clara opened the door gently, the soft click making him turn his head. He didn't look startled, just acknowledged her presence with a small, tired smile. "Hey, Clara," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Thanks for the note, this is nice." He gestured vaguely around the room. "Real nice. Didn't even know this room existed, really. It's a forgotten little corner," Clara replied, moving quietly into the room. "I thought you might appreciate the quiet more than you know," he said, taking a slow, deep breath. "Seems like I ain't had a quiet moment to myself in years. Not a real one, anyway. One where I don't feel like I gotta be something for somebody." Clara poured him a mug of tea and handed it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers. A fleeting warmth. "Thank you," he murmured. Took a sip, then another, a look of profound relief spreading across his face. "Ma'am, this is good. Real good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. The air was soft, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Elvis seemed to relax into the chair, the tension slowly draining from his shoulders. He looked less like the king, and more like a weary traveler. Finally, finding a place to rest. "You know," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's funny, you spend your whole life chasing something, fame, money, all the things they tell you are supposed to make you happy, and then you get it, all of it, and you look around, and you think, is this it?" Clara listened, her gaze fixed on the dark garden outside. She knew this was not just a passing thought, but a deep, fundamental question that had been building inside him for a long time. The quiet room, the tea, her silent presence. He had created the space he needed to finally articulate. "People tell you, Elvis, you got everything a man could ever want, and they're right in a way. I got the house, the cars, the clothes, the adoration of millions. I can buy pretty much anything I set my mind to." He paused, taking another slow sip of tea. "The strange thing is, the more I get, the more empty I feel sometimes, like there's a hole inside me that all the cheers and all the money in the world can't fill." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense, searching. "You understand what I'm talking about, Clara? This feeling like you're still looking for something even when you already found everything." Clara nodded slowly. "I think so, Mr. Presley. It sounds like you're looking for something beyond the material, beyond the external, something for the soul." He let out a long breath, a profound sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah, that's it. For the soul. But what is it? And if all this..." He gestured vaguely at the unseen empire beyond the sunroom walls. "Isn't it then what is..." His voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with a raw, searching vulnerability. "And if you spend your whole life giving everything to the world, chasing a dream that turns out to be hollow, then what truly matters? What is the point of it all?" Question hung in the air, a profound echo in the quiet room. It wasn't a lament, but a genuine philosophical inquiry, born from the unique vantage point of a man who had scaled the highest peaks of worldly success, only to find the summit shrouded in a cloud of existential doubt. The philosophical question, spoken in a hushed whisper, settled into the quiet room like a heavy, unseen guest. Clara felt the immense weight of it, not just for Elvis, but for anyone who had ever achieved great success, only to find it wanting. His words resonated with a universal human struggle amplified by the unique paradox of his life. He was a man adored by millions, yet searching for personal meaning. Clara took a moment letting his words sink in. She didn't feel the need to rush with an answer, knowing that some questions aren't meant to be solved, but rather explored and understood. She recognized the profound isolation he must feel carrying such a burden of fame and expectation, while grappling with such a deeply personal question. "It sounds like," Clara began slowly, carefully choosing her words, "you're asking about the nature of true fulfillment, Mr. Presley, about what gives life genuine value beyond what the world can offer." He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the dark garden outside, as if the answers might be found in the shadows. Fulfillment. That's a good word. I thought for a long time that singing, performing, making people happy, there was the fulfillment. In a way, there's nothing like standing on stage, hearing the roar of the crowd, and on stage, hearing the roar of the crowd, feeling that connextricity. Key closed his eyes briefly, as if reliving those moments. But then, the lights dim, the crowd goes home, and you back in a quiet hotel room? Or here in this big house, and that feeling, that electricity, it fades, and sometimes what's left is just quiet. too quiet, and you start to wonder if that connection was real or just a trick of the light. He opened his eyes, turning to Clara, his expression earnest. "It's like I've given so much, poured my whole being into making that music, into being Elvis, that I forgot to keep some for myself. Or maybe I never really knew what myself was, outside of all that." It's easy to get lost in what you do, especially when it becomes your entire identity, Clara offered, thinking of her own struggles with balancing her aspirations with her own sense of self. The world sees you one way and it becomes hard to see yourself any other way. "Exactly," he exclaimed, the word bursting out, tinged with a raw relief that someone finally understood. "That part of me is getting smaller and smaller, drowned out by the legend." He took another sip of tea, his brow furrowed in thought. "My mama always taught me about faith, about God, about finding peace within. And I believe you find that peace when your life is built on chaos, when every move you make is watched, every word you say is scrutinized, every moment is scheduled. It's like I'm trapped inside a golden cage and the bars are made of fame." Clara listened, her heart heavy. His pain was palpable, the isolation profound. "It sounds like you're searching for authenticity, Mr. Presley, for a way to be true to yourself, even in the midst of all the external pressures." He looked at her, a flicker of something close to hope in his tired eyes. "Authenticity," he repeated, rolling the word on his tongue. "Yeah, that's a good word for it too. How do you hold on to that when the whole world wants to mold you into something else?" He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, looking down at his hands. "Is it even possible to be the Elvis they want and still be the man I know myself to be deep down? Or do you have to choose? And if so, what's the choice?" Question hung in the air again, a direct challenge to his very existence. Clara knew deep in her heart that there was no easy answer. The fact that he was asking, that he was allowing himself to be vulnerable enough to voice these profound doubts, was a testament to his courage and his profound need for understanding. He wasn't looking for solutions from her, not really. He was looking for a shared space of contemplation, a moment of connection where his deepest philosophical inquiry could be acknowledged, understood, and perhaps simply heard. And in that quiet room, under the soft glow of the lamp, Clara was ready to listen. The sunroom remained bathed in quiet. Elvis's question echoed between them, a profound inquiry into the nature of his existence. He wasn't seeking advice, but rather a witness, someone who could truly hear the unspoken burden of his fame. Clara felt the weight of the moment, the privilege of being privy to such an intimate glimpse into the king's soul. He nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the dark garden. "Yeah," he breathed. "That's it. It's like I've been given this incredible gift, this voice, this connection. It truly is. I wouldn't trade the good moments for anything. But then there's the other side of it, the part where the gift feels like a cage, and the connection with millions feels like it's keeping me from a real, true connection with just one or two." He turned to her, his blue eyes wide, searching, pleading for understanding. "So if a man can move mountains with his voice and command the attention of the world, and create such joy and excitement for millions, and yet still feel a profound emptiness within, does it mean that all the glory, all the adoration, all the worldly success isn't the point at all?" His voice trembled slightly. On the last words, raw and utterly vulnerable, this was it, the question. It was complex, layered, encompassing his entire existence, the paradox of his immense fame and his personal spiritual quest. It wasn't a simple query, but a distillation of a lifetime of unparalleled experience, a desperate attempt to reconcile the public figure with the private soul. Clara felt a profound empathy wash over her. This wasn't a question that could be answered with a simple phrase or a philosophical quote. It was a question born of lived experience, a universal human longing magnified by the extraordinary circumstances of his life. "Mr. Presley," Clara replied, her voice gentle. "I don't think there's a single answer to a question like that. But I think the fact that you're even asking it, despite having everything the world says you should want, is part of the answer itself. It means that deep down, there's something more," she explained, trying to articulate her thoughts clearly. "It means that your spirit, your soul, what's sadder by worldly things, no matter how grand, it means you're searching for something deeper, something timeless than the applause." He pondered her words, his brow furrowed in thought. The point might be different for everyone, but the seeking of it that seems to be a fundamental human experience, no matter how famous or rich you are. He was silent for a long moment, simply absorbing her words. The tea had grown cold, but he held the mug in his hands, finding comfort in its warmth. "So all this, all the music, the movies, the shows, it's a path to something else." "It can be," Clara affirmed, "a lonely, lonely question." "It doesn't have to be," Clara said softly. "You're not alone in asking it. Many people, in their own way, struggle with finding meaning and purpose, even those who seem to have normal lives. The scale of your life might be bigger, but the human heart's questions are often the same." The weariness was still there, but now a flicker of something else had joined it. A sense of being understood, perhaps for the very first time, on this deepest of levels. In the quiet of the sunroom, the king of rock and roll had laid bare his soul, and a quiet young woman had listened, not with adulation, but with empathy. And the question remained, a vast, complex inquiry into existence. But in its asking, and in its being truly heard, a small measure of peace had finally entered the room. The weight of Elvis's question and Clara's gentle response settled into a profound silence between them. It wasn't an awkward silence, but one filled with understanding, a shared moment of introspection. Elvis continued to hold the cold tea mug, his gaze distant, processing the conversation. He didn't immediately offer another thought or demand a definitive answer. He simply absorbed. Clara sensed that the value wasn't in solving his existential dilemma, but in acknowledging it, in giving it voice in a space where it could finally breathe. He had been carrying this burden alone, perhaps for years, buried under the layers of fame and expectation. Just having it heard, truly heard, seemed to provide a measure of relief. After a long stretch, Elvis finally turned his head to look at Clara. His eyes were still tired, but the profound loneliness that often shadowed them seemed to have lessened, replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness. "So you think the point ain't ever something you just find like a treasure map?" he asked, his voice low, reflective. "It's more like a journey, even for someone who's supposedly already made it." Clara nodded. "I believe so, Mr. Presley. I think the search for meaning is a lifelong journey. It shifts and changes as we do what feels meaningful. At one point in life, it's like building a beautiful grand house. You can admire its archifold, but eventually you need to step inside, furnish it with things that truly comfort you, and make it a home for your spirit. And sometimes even a grand house can feel empty if it doesn't have a soul." He considered her analogy, a faint smile touching his lips. "A house with no soul," he murmured. Sometimes it feels like that, like I built this magnificent thing, but I forgot to put myself inside it." He shook his head. "I guess I always thought the doing, the performing, the making records, that was the meaning. That was my purpose, and it is. It brings joy. But when does the joy for others stop being joy for yourself? That's the difficult balance, isn't it?" Claire replied. "To continue to give, to share your gift, but to also nourish the part of you that's not just Elvis, to find the quiet moments the authentic connection, the things that replenish your own spirit. Maybe the point isn't about finding a single grand answer, the king and the man, into a life that feels whole. He leaned back in the chair, closing his eyes, a deep sigh escaping him. "Hor," he repeated. "That sounds peaceful." They fell into silence again, but this time it was different. Less heavy, more contemplative. It felt like the shared quiet after a storm when the air is fresh and clear. Elvis didn't ask her to elaborate, didn't press for more. He simply allowed himself to sit with the implications of their conversation, with the space that had been created for his deepest thoughts. Clara didn't offer any grand solutions or life advice. She didn't pretend to have the answers to the king's profound questions. Instead, she offered something arguably more valuable: deep listening, empathy, and the validation that his questions were not just legitimate, but profoundly human. She had seen the man behind the legend, and she had recognized his struggle as her own, albeit on a far grander scale. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to pink the sky outside the sunroom window, Elvis finally stirred. He opened his eyes and they met Clara's. There was a look of quiet gratitude in them, a profound sense of having been truly seen. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for listening and for being here." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The unspoken understanding hung in the air, a bond forged in the quiet honesty of their late-night conversation. He slowly rose from the chair, a little less burdened than when he had first entered the room. He walked to the window, watching the sun rise over the Graceland grounds, his silhouette framed against the growing light. He still carried the weight of his life, but now perhaps he carried it with a renewed sense of purpose, spurred by the clarity of his own profound question and the unexpected comfort of having shared it. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full of possibilities. The late-night conversation in the sunroom became their secret, a quiet understanding shared only between Elvis and Clara. He never explicitly referenced it again, nor did she. But the interaction had subtly yet profoundly changed him. Clara, with her keen eye, noticed the difference. It wasn't an overnight transformation. The demands of his career remained relentless. The fame still clung to him like a second skin. But there was a new depth in his eyes, a certain quiet thoughtfulness that surfaced more frequently. He seemed less restless, more grounded in himself. His interactions with others, while still warm and engaging, seemed to carry an added layer of authenticity. He'd pause, truly listen, when someone spoke, his famous blue eyes meeting theirs with genuine attention. He would sometimes spend longer, quiet moments with his family, with his beloved grandmother, just sitting and talking, not as the king, but as a devoted son and grandson. Clara even saw him pick up his old Bible more often, sitting quietly with it in his private study. She noticed a shift in his music, too. During jam sessions, he'd gravitate more towards the gospel tunes, singing them with a raw passion that hadn't always been present in the more commercial recordings. His voice, already legendary, seemed to find new depths, imbued with a yearning for something beyond the physical. It was as if he was pouring his philosophical question, his search for meaning, directly into his songs, making them resonate with an even deeper emotional truth. One afternoon, during a break from a grueling rehearsal, Elvis caught Clara's eye from across the room. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a private acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It was a silent thank you, a recognition of the space she had created and the listening ear she had offered. Clara nodded back, a warmth spreading through her chest. She knew she hadn't given him answers, but she had given him the gift of being heard, and that seemed to be exactly what he needed. Later that week, Clara received a small, beautifully bound copy of The Prophet, identical to the one she had seen in the library. It was delivered to her room by one of the Graceland staff, with no note, no fanfare. But inside, on the dedication page, scrawled in Elvis's distinctive hand, were two simple words: "For Clara, keep searching." Her heart swelled. It was his way of saying that he understood her own quiet quest for meaning and a subtle affirmation of their shared journey. He also started asking her more personal questions, not intrusive ones, but genuine inquiries about her own aspirations. "So, you gonna be a writer, huh, honey?" he'd ask. "What kind of stories you want to tell?" And he'd listen intently to her answers, offering encouragement and sometimes a surprisingly achievable observation about human nature or the creative process. He seemed to value her perspective, not because she was a fan or an industry insider, but because she was simply Clara, a fellow human being navigating her own path. Clara realized that her brief time at Graceland was drawing to a close. Mr. Davies had found a more permanent assistant, and her internship was coming to its natural end. She felt a bittersweet pang. She had come to observe the king, and she had. But she had also encountered the man, vulnerable and searching. She had witnessed a unique kind of human struggle, and it had forever shaped her understanding of life, fame, and the elusive nature of fulfillment. On her last day, she found Elvis in the music room quietly strumming his guitar. He looked up as she entered, a soft smile on his face. "Leaving us, huh, Clara?" he said, his voice tinged with a slight melancholy. "Yes, Mr. Presley, my internship is done, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity. It's been truly remarkable." He put down his guitar and stood walking towards her. He held out his hand, and she took it. "You're a good soul, Clara, a good listener. Don't ever lose that." He paused, his blue eyes meeting hers. "And remember what we talked about. Keep searching for that deeper point. Don't let the noise of the world drown out your own heart." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, then released it. "You got a gift for words, honey. You use them to tell the truth, the real truth. People need that." Clara felt a lump in her throat. This was more than just a polite farewell. It was a benediction, an acknowledgement of their profound connection. "Thank you, Mr. Presley," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "And you too, don't stop searching for your own truth." He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "Never, Clara, never." As she walked out of Graceland that day, the sun still shining brightly, Clara carried with her not just the memory of the king, but the profound human story of a man who, despite having everything, was still searching for the one thing that money and fame could never buy. And she knew that the question he had so vulnerably revealed would forever be a part of her own journey, a testament to the enduring human quest for a life that truly matters. Years passed. Clara Jensen built her life, her own quiet aspirations taking root and flourishing. She pursued her writing, always drawn to stories that explored the inner lives of people, the hidden struggles beneath polished exteriors. The experience at Graceland remained a vivid, foundational memory, a prism through which she viewed the complexities of human existence. She followed Elvis's career from afar, the news reports, the new albums, the film it's touring. She noticed how at times his music seemed to carry an even deeper, more soulful yearning, particularly in his gospel recordings or during his live performances, when he would sometimes pause, his eyes distant as if reflecting on something profound before launching into a heartfelt ballad. She wondered if these moments were connected to their conversation, to the question that haunted him. The world adored him, revered him, demanded more and more of him. But Clara knew the truth behind the glamour, a man perpetually searching for something elusive, something beyond the thunderous applause and the blinding lights. She knew that behind the legend was a profound philosophical question, a question that resonated with the very core of what it meant to be human. She never spoke of their private conversation to anyone. It remained a sacred trust, a quiet secret shared between a king and a young woman who had simply offered a listening ear. She realized that the value of that moment wasn't in gossiping about it, but in internalizing its lesson. It taught her that true wealth isn't measured in possessions or fame, but in the richness of one's inner life, the courage to ask difficult questions, and the capacity for genuine connection. Elvis Presley's life continued to unfold in the public eye, a spectacular, unmatched phenomenon. Clara always carried the image of him in the dim sunroom, a man stripped of his regal facade, wrestling with the most fundamental of human inquiries. She understood that his performances, his charitable acts, his spiritual explorations, they were all facets of his ongoing search for that point. When the news of his passing came, years later, the world reeled. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, celebrating his music, his charisma, his unparalleled impact on popular culture. Clara, too, mourned the loss of an icon, but more deeply she mourned the loss of a man who had wrestled with profound questions, a man who had sought something more, something eternal amidst the fleeting glory of the world. She reread the prophet, the copy he had given her, the words, "Keep searching," etched into the flyleaf. The book's timeless wisdom seemed even more poignant now. She understood that Elvis's philosophical question had never been fully answered, not in the way one answers a math problem, but the asking of it, the wrestling with it, the courage to voice it in a moment of vulnerability. That was the true legacy. It was a legacy not just for him, but for everyone who heard his music and felt a stirring in their own souls. Perhaps, Clara mused, the very reason his music resonated with so many was because it unknowingly tapped into that universal human longing for something more. His voice, which could move mountains, was also the instrument of a man seeking a deeper truth, searching for a meaning that transcended fame and fortune. Clara continued to write, to observe, to listen. Quiet conversation in the sunroom had given her a profound insight into the human condition, a wisdom she carried into every story she crafted. She understood that everyone, no matter their station in life, carries their own quiet questions, their own unspoken burdens, their own search for meaning. And sometimes the greatest gift one can offer another is simply to sit in the quiet and listen, truly listen, as they articulate their deepest philosophical question, knowing that the journey of seeking is often more profound than any easy answer. King of rock and roll had asked his question in a private, vulnerable moment, and in doing so he had perhaps unknowingly opened a path for others to begin their own search, proving that even in the brightest spotlight the most profound truths are often found in the quietest conversation. His philosophical question, though never fully resolved, became a testament to his humanity, a timeless inquiry echoing through the heart of the man who had once been the greatest star on earth.